very little appreciated is the cost of early research. Now, if you're looking at what Big Pharma worldwide has been spending in 2005 on early research alone, it is a staggering amount of $25 billion, and they have come up with 11 new medical entities for that investment. Average, more than $2 billion in early research alone for one new medical entity. If we are looking, however, what early research gains, if you're looking in terms of feedback from a final product, it is very small. We're looking at, in spite of cost of $2 billion per NME, early research gains only maximally 2.5% of royalty from a fully commercialized final product. Which means that it actually makes sense to import successful early research projects rather than going through the time and cost that it takes to come up with fruitful and productive early research. On the technology side, I think it makes sense for Korean small pharma companies not to develop novel technology each for themselves, but to make use of technology platforms which can be shared. Sharing of cost-intense visual technology and competence through the establishment of cooperative platforms will address largely the cost. This has been tried through theoretically here in Korea, so there is now in place a visual technology platform, and the idea to make visual IT-based technology available to that platform, to import early research. In this case, one example that has been put into place is INSERM, all of the French public research, which can be made available to this platform. And Korean pharma can now go and cooperate and use both technology and early research. Here is a model to address cost in a very effective way. So this enables accelerated drug discovery through cooperation. Now together, if I summarize up to here, there is world-leading technology available here in Korea based on information technology to deliver first-in-class drugs through phenomic drug-to-target capabilities. There is in principle access of all pharma entities to shared cutting-edge technology and competence. There could be reduced cost to pharma through cooperative resource management and increased national pharma cooperativity through distinct disease models and our compound classes. In principle then, the strong positioning of Korean pharma to deliver first-in-class phase 2 drug candidates to niche markets. Let me briefly also touch on new business models that would come up alongside with these new approaches. If we're looking at the classical drug discovery process and this new model of cooperativity that should and must be fostered here in Korea, well then everybody is taking care of his specific aspect rather than trying to discover the entire pipeline. Early research is being imported from INSERM or other. There is Max Planck, there is the NIH, there is the MRC in England. Why do it yourself? Just look at what has worked and import it. It is much more cost effective. On the side of the visual discovery cooperative, the technology is available and can be accessed by Korean pharma then, who can by themselves focus on preclinical development and taking novel drug target pairs into clinical phase 1 and phase 2 to then pass it on to the big pharma players who should and can very well focus on their part of the business, clinical phase 3 and marketing. So here you have a model of cooperativity. Now what about the profits? What about the earning in this model? Now classically, the value inflection points in drug discovery are depicted here. They are between clinical phase 2 and 3 and after phase 3, where a lot of value is being put into a new drug. However, the new models are changing even that. Because new drugs and new targets are so scarce in such demand, there is a new inflection point coming up at an earlier stage when new targets and new drugs have been validated early on. And it is a new business model of low risk and high gain that can be accessed here. And overall, the cooperative approach will allow Korean pharma to efficiently capture the critical value inflection points of this new process. Now I'm coming to the end here. I hope I've made the point that overall at this moment there's a window of opportunity because pharma is an industry in crisis. There's a window of opportunity for Korea to succeed in the pharma industry by correctly positioning for future niche buster markets. For that, there has to be help in implementing Korea's already existing IT-driven phenomic discovery technology. There has to be investment in R&D on visual diagnostic development. There has to be more effort in changing corporate culture so as to build cooperative models for Korean pharma with shared technology platform but distinct therapy areas. And finally, there has to be international cooperation in order to draft feasible early research projects into the peninsula. Taking all of these aspects together, I think it is feasible to get the foot in the door and to get the foot in the door quickly into this future revenue market. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Neabas, for your valuable contributions. And we have a time limit. And now I would like to move topics to Human New Deal. And Dr. Hyun Oh-seok will address this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then first of all, let me congratulate the successful opening of that 5th Jeju Peace Forum, and I would like to express my deepest appreciation to organize for inviting me to this wonderful island, Jeju. In this session, I am greatly honored to have this chance to share my perspective on the Human New Deal policy. As Chairman Krab mentioned at the outset, this is a new policy direction suggested by the new government. Actually, the Korea Development Institute has played an important role in formulating these human new deal policies in collaboration with the Research Institute, academia, and Presidential Council for Future and Vision. Okay. Next. First, I would like to briefly go over the background and necessity of the Human New Deal policy and explain the meanings and objective later. Then I'm going to share with you my presentations, my perspective and suggestions on the major policy agenda of the Human New Deal policy. Next. As you may aware, the Korean society has gone through a number of changes and faced several new challenges since the foreign exchange crisis in 1997. First, the government has put in enormous efforts in the past decade to increase the social expenditure. Social expenditure grew nearly fourfold in the past decade. The basic framework of Korea's social security system was finalized during this period, and many new systems were introduced, such as National Basic Livelihood Security System in year 2000. Not only that, in the context of the workfare, not welfare, it also adopted the Earned Income Tax Credit, so-called EITC, and the public child care system. Next. Despite this rapid increase in social expenditure, Korea's income inequality has continued to deteriorate since the mid-1990s. Gini coefficient rose sharply from 0.275 in 1996 to 0.321 in 2008. Moreover, the relative poverty rate, which is the proportion of households with less than 50% of median income, increased even faster from 9.3% to 14.3% over the same period. Korea has been long boasted equitable growth during its development decades. Therefore, such a drastic change raised a great concern. Next. The deterioration of income distribution is mainly attributable to failed trickle-down effect from economic growth into poor households. The deterioration also has weakened the foundation of middle-income class. The proportion of the middle class, which is household with 50% to 150% of median income, has fallen by more than 10 percentage points from 68% in 1996 to 56% in year 2008. Continued deterioration in income distribution, in spite of the increasing social expenditure, implies that existing welfare expansion policy might not be enough to substantially reduce poverty and restore the middle class. Next. Another concern is the decline in social mobility and the subsequent weakness in economic dynamism. In particular, the falling public education contrast to booming private education has widened the education gap among income classes, resulting in the intergenerational transmission of poverty. For example, high-income households spend 10 times more on private education than low-income households. Along with this, there is growing gap of wages and job security between labor union versus non-union, large company versus small and medium enterprise, and regular workers versus non-regular workers. This dual structure of labor market has limited the upward mobility among income classes. Despite the increase in relative poverty, Korea's social safety net has not sufficiently fulfilled its role in preventing and extricating from poverty. The expansion of social insurance so far has been highly centered on regular workers, hence its protection of temporary and self-employed workers is very weak. Public assistance has limited capacity in terms of benefit coverage and has an ex-post protection system which is inadequate in preventing poverty. In addition, the all-or-nothing type of comprehensive pay system is also pointed out as a problem that greatly reduces the incentives to work in order to extricate from poverty. Along with these issues, Korea's low fertility rate and rapidly aging population increasingly threaten as serious social issues. Insufficient support system available for the working women, overly excessive cost of private education, and prevalent discrimination in workplace for married women are obstacles that refrain both fertility and women's labor participation rate. Korea's elderly dependency ratio is expected to rise by almost 6 times from 12% in year 2005 to 72% in year 2050. Rapid aging population will not only undermine the growth potentials, but also will substantially raise social risk. This phenomenon of aging population is likely to serve as a stumbling block for Korea to join the ranks of developed countries. As I explained briefly, the Korean society today, faced with the new challenges, calls for the government to move beyond the existing ex-post, residual, and passive attitude its social policy stance and to intervene in more active and preemptive manner. In particular, there is an urgent need to preemptively build and invest in the foundation to enhance human capacity, potential, and will in order to overcome poverty and revive the middle income class. Under this context, the current Korean government launched Human New Deal last March and has declared its strong will to protect the middle class from erosion, promote new entries, and foster future entrants through comprehensive measures that focus on the middle class. The term Human New Deal has not been coined exactly, but in a broad sense, let me interpret as like that. Social policy for preemptive social investment and system improvement with an aim to build competency to count potential risk factors in individual life cycle and enhance individual progress. In this context, the core value of Human New Deal is to embody integrated society pursuing shared growth through building a foundation to strengthen the capacity of all members of the society in order to actively participate in a knowledge-based economy of the 21st century. Therefore, the objectives of Human New Deal policy is to establish a society with a large middle class as the foundation of social stability and balanced growth, a society that guarantees equal opportunity and high upward mobility of social strata, and a society with a sustainable and broad-based growth potential. In order to accomplish these policy goals of Human New Deal policy, there are three driving strategies to pursue: preventative and investable approach, user-oriented integrated approach, and life cycle approach. First, Human New Deal approach needs to focus on preventive intervention in poverty and income inequality through preemptive investment to enhance competence-based human resources. To lessen human capital inequality, intensive focus should be put on the low-income class through investment on human capacity development so that equal opportunity will be guaranteed to all income levels. Among these preventative and investable approaches, one of the most important is the investment on children. Childhood poverty leads to poor school performance and inferior social and economic status later in life. Human New Deal policy needs to considerably strengthen the early intervention program to heighten human capital development of children from poor families. Head Start of the United States or Sure Start of the UK are some of the good examples in this respect. Second, user-oriented integrated approach is needed. Existing social policies on welfare, education, and labor are provider-oriented, which cause efficiency loss, frequent overlaps, and omissions. Even the method of financial support is provide-oriented as well. The educational policy in particular was implemented by the principle of input inequality, undermining the performance of incentives of teachers and schools, which serves as factors for the collapse of public education and expansion of private education. In order to solve these problems, the new Human New Deal policy should focus on the enhancement of the comprehensive human capacity through integrated care, education, and training services. It is also necessary to make financial assistance available through a direct voucher method to users in order to expand their selection choices as well as to improve service quality of provider institutions through healthy competition. Third, because of each life cycle of each individual differs, risk factors and development stages of each individual differ as well. And hence, the role of government for each individual should differ. Human New Deal policy needs to put concerted efforts on accurately identifying different risk factors in different stages of life, such as preschool, school, productive age, and old age, so that step by step, customized services will be available. As mentioned earlier, early intervention beginning in infancy and preschooling is most effective. Accordingly, the strategic investment scheme of Human New Deal should put its priority on early intervention, such as the preschool stage for substantial development in human capacity. Under these strategies of the Human New Deal policy, there are four major policy agendas I'd like to suggest for the implementation of each sector. Firstly, in order to pursue a broader growth through restoring the middle income class, it is crucial to reinforce social safety net, which would improve economic security and upward mobility. As the Hamilton Project from the Brookings Institute states, the proper social safety net will function as a springboard for a better future. In this regard, Korea needs to expand the coverage of the social insurance as a primary social safety net and that of public assistance as secondary safety net. Next. Secondly, it is important to guarantee the equal education opportunities through the quality improvement of public education and reduction in the cost of private education. It is important to establish the student-oriented teacher evaluation system, strengthen schools' autonomy and accountability, and expand the rights of student and school selections. It is necessary to enhance the quality of public education, to improve the school entrance system, and prevent excessive growth of private academic institutes. Thirdly, as for those welfare services, it is necessary to strengthen the poverty prevention and social mobility through aggressive early investment policies. To that end, it is important to expand the Dream Start Project National ID, which is an ongoing program that integrates healthcare, childcare, and welfare, focusing mainly on the children from low-income class. Next. Fourthly, a core challenge to restoring the income class is to job creation. Under the premises, the government does not create jobs, but ultimately jobs are created by private investment. It is necessary to consistently implement measures that alleviate the dual structure of labor market, upgrade the labor management relation, and correct unfair trade practice, and enhance the productivity of the service industries. Next. Lastly, for the protection of the middle class, it is necessary to exert efforts to reduce the living expenses. The housing cost, along with the cost of private education, is one of the major burdens on the living cost of middle class. Therefore, enormous efforts are called for to stabilize the real estate market by curbing the excessive speculative demand. Also, the government is currently working on a project to expand a special program to provide houses for example, for newlywed couples and further to household with multiple children. And I don't have much time, so let me stop here. Thank you very much for your listening.
Okay, thank you very much for your insightful presentations. And Mr. Freeman, would you care to offer us your perspective?
There we go. Okay. So you see the title, you see a Korean ambulance, and this been an emergency, this crisis, which those are the three things I'll be saying, and I'll talk a little bit about. I think the key lesson from this crisis is that this Wall Street model of capitalism, the view that the American model was the peak system, has failed. And I show you some people in Wall Street. And they're the only people who seem to have made a profit out of this endeavor, and only some of them, of course, some banks. The interesting thing is that the weak part of the capitalist system has not been the labor institutions, though they create some problems, of course, the job or the social welfare state. And those were the things that we worried about over the last 20 or 30 years. So I says they exercise the IMF, the World Bank, etc. The weak part has been what I think it's always been in capitalist economies, what it certainly was in the Great Depression, and it was in the Korean crisis in 1997-98, it was in the Swedish crisis in 1992, it was in the Argentine crisis. Namely, it was the finance market. And with what I call here socially perverse incentives, people could take huge risks, and they didn't bear the cost of those risks. That's been our problem. And something which I found hard to believe for the United States, but I think has been true, something called crony capitalism. That one thought of the Indonesians as having crony capitalism. One thought of the chaebols perhaps connected with the Korean government, but it turns out this has been endemic to the American model as well. Then I think another lesson we should remember in this, the experts knew less than you or I thought they did. This includes these physics, math whizzes who were telling us that the risk was all being shared around the world when it wasn't. They convinced Alan Greenspan that it was being shared all around the world, and it wasn't. It was being concentrated and caused problems. We have seen from governments around the world a massive change in attitudes. And the Korean government has been one of the leading governments in introducing strong policies against the recession. The Obama administration in the US has done things. The central banks around the world have literally reversed the things that they were telling us 10 years ago because they're, I think, reasonably rational and looking out at the real world. The Chinese government has had a very successful stimulus package as well. And so I'm uneasy about experts. I think we should be this. Now the question of what are we going to do in the future to deal with the next global thing. And I think this door is open. The New Deal, Human New Deal policy is an effort to think through some different ways to help poor people. But there's just a lot of opening now for rethinking what we can do. The danger ahead is what the IMF has pointed out to us, that the recessions associated with financial crises are the worst kinds of recessions that we have, and they last longer. And then they say globally synchronized recessions are worse. And then I ask them, well, what about if it's globally synchronized and it's a financial bank-driven crisis? And they say, well, the only example was the Great Depression. But we seem to be recovering. So it may very well be that here the IMF, as an expert in this, may have not understood how much the global economy may get us out of the recession. I mean, their claim was this is likely to be unusually severe and sluggish. They could be wrong. As I said, the experts, I'm very dubious now of what the experts know. What we have seen in the last recoveries they've been jobless. Labor has taken the beat for many years. It's true in the U.S. It was true in Korea. Up to the 1997-98 crisis, Korea was didn't have this great problem of rising inequality, of people at the bottom losing ground. A number of countries this has happened. So I give some examples here. Argentina, which was supposed to be this great example of Washington consensus, capital-driven growth. Sweden, which is a social welfare state, had the same problem. So it's not an issue of that you can necessarily say some system is better than others. And in the U.S., job losses have taken decades to recover. And people who graduate into a great recession suffer for their entire working lives. They rarely get back on track because they lose. You may get promoted, but it'll be 3 or 4 years after you would have been promoted. So your whole trajectory is lower. That's been the story that we have. So this is a real problem. So I just think of our country and this country and other countries looking for new policies. Well, I quote the President of the United States, who warns us about trickle-down economics, and he favors something called trickle-up economics. And then I say, well, what exactly is the trickle-up economics from our country? And I think you can be somewhat critical of the New Deal here. What exactly is it? Well, it's efforts to find something new. And it isn't that people really have this down well. I give my little version of this, of what I would consider as part of this. And the part that is in bold at the bottom is I think, meets very much with what some of the Korean New Deal policies are. Preventative policies instead of Band-Aids. We shouldn't be in the business of providing Band-Aids for citizens after the banks have basically destroyed parts of the economy, destroyed jobs, and harmed small businesses in particular. And so I have some things in the middle there you can look at. Now I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of sharing policies, some of which I think are part of the Korean government's recovery, some which they haven't thought about. We have done some work in both the U.S. and the UK economies, and we're actually working with an Australian company on this as well, where you have some form of sharing in both decision-making and in rewards, and companies like that tend to do better than other companies. And the trend in markets is towards more team activity, more group incentives, and you're trying to link self-interest and cooperative behavior. And the problem for governments is this works best when businesses choose these programs. They don't work so well when you give them a tax break to make those